This is the Nintendo Players Podcast, episode 18. I am Jen Griffiths, and I am co-founder of Nintendo North Wales and co-head admin of Nintendo Players UK. I'm also your podcast host today. Today I'm joined by Ryan James, who's the author of the Most Relaxing Video Games book. But Ryan, would you like to introduce yourself properly?
Sure. So, along with writing the most relaxing video games, my main job is working at a data analytics company called Fan Census, where we primarily focus in the video game area. I'm VP of commercial there and also work in the insights department. And then outside of that, in my spare time, I also review games for NintendoInsider.com as well.
Cool. So, you've written this book. What's your background and what made you want to write the book in the first place?
So originally, I'd always wanted to write a book. It was something that I just always wanted to do, and I had no idea how to go about doing it. How do you go and get published? How do you find the time to do it? So another author called Chris Scullion, he wrote a number of the NES and SNES encyclopedia books. He put out a blog post on his blog that basically gave a great explanation of his journey to go from starting out to a published author, and that was really useful for me. And I actually wound up reaching out to the same publisher with an idea I had, which was to interview indie developers who had made games like Ultimate Chicken Horse and things like that, and basically do a more positive take on the industry. Because I forget who it was who wrote a book which was looking at the development process. Jason Schreier, he wrote a series of books which was looking at the problems with some development processes of some games like Uncharted 4 and things like that. I wanted to do the more positive side. Here are some indie studios, first games they've done, and how they went from starting out to a really, really popular indie title. So I'd actually interviewed a few people already and started writing some chapters, and I sent it over to the publisher, and they said that it was a bit too niche of a subject. So they wanted something that perhaps tapped into a more mainstream audience, some popular franchise and things like that. So then I pitched a different idea that I'd also had, which was it was called a video game for any occasion, and each chapter was going to be focused on a different subject. So games to finish in one sitting, games to relax to, games to make drinking games out of, things like that. They really liked the idea, but they said you could probably make a book on one of these subjects, like focus on one subject. And so I thought that's a great idea, and I went with relaxing games because relaxing video games is something that's always been helpful for me throughout my life as someone who deals with anxiety a lot
Yes.
and struggles with those sorts of things. Playing the likes of Call of Duty and things like that is not always the best solution for me when it comes to wanting to unwind after a long day or a particularly struggling day. So I went with that subject because I thought, as well, on the other side, it may help other people in a similar situation who perhaps don't know of a lot of these games. The big names like Assassin's Creed and that are always going to be in the headlines, but you see a lot of these other genres that are perhaps less popular or a bit more niche not get that same spotlight. So I thought it might help in that area as well. So that's how I went from my original idea to the relaxing game side of things.
Cool. So, yeah, you were saying about anxiety and stuff. I previously suffered with quite severe anxiety, but I think as a community, we all agree that Animal Crossing saved lockdown for a lot of
Mm.
people. It turned lockdown into a potentially positive experience because we had the community feel of playing Animal Crossing together. I even had my birthday party in Animal Crossing that year. So,
Amazing.
yeah, I can totally relate to what you're saying. So, how did you determine what counted as relaxing?
So it was really a case of initially looking back through all the games that I've played throughout my life, which sounds like that would be very difficult. But for me, I have a catalog of every game I own, basically, for whatever reason, shall we say. So it was just combing through that list, looking through ones that were a no-brainer. Like you say, Animal Crossing was an obvious choice. And a few others were like, oh, of course that has to be in here. Endless Ocean was one that I thought of straight away. The scuba diving game on the Wii.
Yeah.
So it was just going through that obvious choice list, and then taking suggestions from other people as well, people I knew, people online, for those that perhaps I hadn't played before. When it came to what boxes does it need to tick, it was a case of, does it make me feel relaxed? Is the presentation of it relaxing? Because it could be the game itself is of a genre that you wouldn't necessarily consider relaxing, but just the general vibe of it is, a good example of that is Donkey Kong Country. The platforming genre, I think by its very nature, is not what people immediately think, that's a relaxing game, especially one that was as tough as Donkey Kong Country. But because of its visual style at the time, because of the music in particular as well, and a lot of its organic environments, that has always been quite, a chilled game for me. And I think it probably helps that I've played it like 100 times at this point as well.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't like there is one rule these need to follow. It was more a case of, let's get the obvious ones out there. Let's also throw a few curveballs in there, because I wanted to surprise people. Those that have played a lot of these games, I thought it would be cool to just throw one in there that I could offer my explanation for why it's here, and hopefully it
Yeah.
does convince them as well, because it's subjective, that this subject in some
Yeah.
ways, where people will disagree and say, well, Tetris is a good one, where people have said, I don't find Tetris relaxing at all. I'm always like, playing very tense. But for me, it's almost becomes like just something that you just do without thinking about it.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, as I say, there wasn't one rule. There was a few sort of guidance points for me, and then the list then naturally formed to about 58, I think it was, in the end.
Yeah, well, it was quite interesting bringing it to my event. I think I brought it to the August event or the July event. I can't remember when I received it, but it was interesting that people found the games and were like, "How is that relaxing?" And they actually read what you put. I was like, I see it now. So it was interesting how you kind of justified why you thought it was relaxing, and people actually understood what you were saying. So it's quite an amazing feat to cram 58 games into there. Which was your ultimate favourite relaxing game that you added?
So one that I always fall back to a lot of it, well, there's two, I suppose. One is the Picross games,
Hmm.
which, if you've ever played those, it's like a numerical deduction game where you're trying to shade in a grid of squares. Those games have always been something that I will play on a near daily basis, because there's so many of them on the Switch as well. And I think they're great because they're not only quite a laid back time to actually, like any puzzle solving, like a crossword, or whatever the case. It's also you can refocus your brain onto something else. You get so lost in, okay, well, if this row is, got 5 in there and this one has it, you just completely shut off everything outside of you. And that those games have always been amazing. As I say, if I just want to have half an hour where I can just, switch off and refocus that energy onto something, more positive, then those games have been great for doing that. And another one that I've always really loved playing is Outrun 2 Coast to Coast. That game, I think, again, racing games, some may consider them not so relaxing, but for me, I think because it's an arcadey type game, I think it was the whole road trip vibe of it all that kind of, you know, makes it stand out to me. Like, I love the idea of you're driving along and you can go from a beach to a desert to a jungle to all sorts, and just watch these settings go by. And if you do badly, you don't really care, because each race is only like 5 minutes long, and then you just, I'll just try again and give it another go. So yeah, and then the music in those games as well in the Outrun
Oh
series is
yeah,
always
definitely.
awesome. So those two are at least two of them that I would say stand out for me, and ones that I play on a regular basis for sure.
Mhm. Okay, so the next question is, what was your most dubious choice? Well, you mentioned having some curveballs.
I think the one that gets mentioned more so, aside from Donkey Kong Country, as one of them, and it tends to be from people who played it as a kid and said, "How the hell did you put that in there?" The other one was The Quarry, which is from a studio called Supermassive Games, and it's basically a choose your own adventure horror
Mm.
game, where my logic behind it was, those games have always felt to me like sitting down and watching a horror movie, except you actually have your say in what happens, what the characters say, what the characters do. So there's not anything that's particularly stressful to actually have to do with the control. Yes, the setting is quite tense because it's a horror game, of course, and scary and everything. But I love sitting down and watching movies, and I love the idea of these video games that give you a chance to say, hey, I'm going to be the director of this movie now. So if I want this guy to be a jerk, I can make him say all the wrong things and make the wrong decisions. This person I like, they're going to be the hero of this. I'm going to try and make them survive. And all you're doing is just selecting choices from a lineup of what action do you want to take. So I think when people initially hear The Quarry, they go, that's a horror game. Are you insane? But then hopefully when I explain it, or when the book explains it, people do come around to the idea, and or at least say, okay, I get where you're coming from. Still not for me, because I know horror is something that people
Yeah.
either love or hate.
Yeah.
It's hard to find someone that's like, I'm okay with horror. It's either you really like them or you absolutely hate them and don't want to watch them. But I think that's probably the one that gets called upon most in terms of dubious choices potentially.
Well, we don't ever feature horror in our community events because they're family friendly, and I don't like horror because I've got a very visual imagination. So yeah, um, fair enough. Are there any more recent games that have launched since you published your book that you would have liked to have included?
So there's one that I've very recently played, which was announced in the Indie Showcase a couple of weeks back, which was Peglin, which is a game. If you took the game Peggle and combined it with a roguelike RPG. And Peggle is one of the games that is in the relaxing book because all you're doing in that is directing a ball bearing and firing it. That's all you're doing.
Mm.
And then everything just plays out for you and you watch this ball bounce around like a pachinko machine, basically. And so this indie studio created a game which was Peggle, but what if it had turn-based RPG mechanics? So the number of pegs you hit influences the attack power that you unleash upon these enemies. And the roguelike elements are very similar to something like Slay the Spire, where you are choosing your path, and it may be you fight an enemy, or it might be that you come across a treasure chest and things like that. So that's one that I think I would put in if I was to add an extension to it. And the other one is Balatro. Balatro came out in January and is a roguelike poker style game,
Mhm.
which basically you're trying to meet these targets for the number of chips you win by playing hands of poker. But the twist is that you can actually stack your deck. So every round you can buy cards to put in there. So if you wanted to turn, your spades into hearts, you could try and do that. So you have more chance of getting a flush. You can also, boost the scores of certain hands. So if you played a two pair, you could upgrade it so you get more chips that
Yeah.
way. It is an incredible game, and again, it's something that card games by their very nature are quite a chill time. There's no time limit on this thing, and it's one of those games that I found myself staying up till about like 1 2 a.m because I just wanted to finish a run. Like, it's like I can't stop here because I just want to keep going. So that would definitely be in there as well, had it come out earlier for me.
Fair enough. So, do you think you'll ever write a second volume? You mentioned that you had different categories. Maybe you could do a different category next, or would you do more relaxing games? What do you
So
reckon?
there is a second book coming out next March. It is on a different category, which is the best competitive multiplayer games.
Ah, we'll definitely be
So
interested in that one then.
yeah, so it's going from one end of the spectrum to the other, where it's like
Yeah.
relax and unwind to tense multiplayer battles. But that one is going to be it's a very similar layout, very similar style, where there's 60 games that I pick on, and both a mixture of online and local multiplayer games as well, because I wanted to make sure that was highlighted. That I think a lot of people take local multiplayer for granted nowadays, with online being such a big thing, but there's still a lot of great games that are getting released that mean that four of you can sit on a sofa and just
Yeah, well,
have an
that's
awesome
what
time.
Nintendo Plays UK and particularly Nintendo North Wales is all about, is getting those people together, not on the sofa, but there's lecture theatre most often, but
Yeah,
the big screen, everyone playing on the same seats, effectively.
yeah,
That's what we stand for, basically.
yeah.
We love the relaxing stuff too, but the multiplayer is where we bring everyone together.
Exactly. I mean, throughout my childhood, that was a big part of it. Was
Mm.
getting, going to someone's house and playing Goldeneye or
Yeah,
playing Super Smash
same.
Brothers, and that continued throughout, my secondary school, and then even at
Yeah,
university where we would get together. It's like, hey, before we go out, for a night out, let's get Rock Band going, and we'll play that for a couple of
amazing.
hours and have some drinks. And even now, like now I've got, two kids and they're getting older. They enjoy playing the like Mario Party, and that's great because it's then experiencing these multiplayer games, but in a
Yeah,
completely different environment where it's not with your mates, but now with someone who is just learning video games, and it's awesome. So much like the relaxing ones, there was a reason behind why picking this subject, because as I say, like I love single player games, I love adventures like that, but multiplayer as well was something that I just have such fond memories of and still continue to play now. So yeah, that'll be out next March. You can pre-order that. I think the pre-orders actually appeared like a couple of weeks ago, which
that's handy.
is yeah.
So I
And then
guess the next question is, how do we find that pre-order and how do we order your current book?
so search on Google for the most relaxing video games, and a number of retailers will pop up. You'll have Amazon, Waterstones, WH Smith's, Forbidden Planet, and then of course the publisher, the book publisher themselves, White Owl and Pen and Sword, will have the book on there available as well. And similarly with the second book as well, Amazon, all the usual retailers available for pre-order as well.
Cool. So thanks for coming on and talking to me today. I hope you enjoyed it. And all the
No,
best
thank
for
you for having me.
your upcoming book as well.
Thanks very much.